The family dinner was proceeding like any other Tuesday evening. The metallic sound of silverware against plates filled the dining room, mixed with trivial conversations about work and school. Mom kept asking if anyone wanted more mashed potatoes, and my younger sister Sophia was complaining about her math teacher for the third time this week. Dad sat at the head of the table, methodically cutting his steak into perfect squares, the way he always did. Everything was normal. Everything was safe. Everything was exactly as it had been for the past 18 years of my life. Until the phone rang. The shrill sound cut through our comfortable routine like a knife. Dad's fork paused halfway to his mouth, and I noticed his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Mom glanced at the clock on the wall, 7:47 p.m. Who would call during dinner? I'll get it, Dad said, wiping his mouth with his napkin before standing up. His movements were measured, controlled, the way they always were. Dad never rushed anything. From the kitchen, we could hear his voice, professional and respectful. Yes, Mr. Morrison. Of course. Tomorrow without fail. I understand completely, sir. When he returned to the table, something had changed. There was something in his eyes that I couldn't quite identify, a shadow that hadn't been there before. His shoulders seemed more rigid, his movements more calculated. Who was that, honey? Mom asked, serving more salad onto Sophia's plate despite her protests. The boss. Work stuff. Everything okay? She pressed, with that maternal intuition that could detect trouble from a mile away. Yeah, everything's fine. It's nothing, but I knew it wasn't nothing. Over the past few months, I had started noticing subtle changes in Dad's behavior. He came home later from work, received strange phone calls at odd hours, and sometimes I found him awake in the early morning hours, staring out the window as if he was waiting for something, or someone. The way he said, "It's nothing," reminded me of how he used to dismiss my scraped knees when I was little. But this felt different. This felt bigger. Are you sure nothing's wrong, Dad? I asked, setting my fork down. I told you it's nothing, Michael. Focus on your dinner. His tone was sharper than usual, carrying an edge that made Mom and Sophia exchange worried glances. The silence that followed felt heavy, oppressive, like a storm cloud settling over our dining room table. Sophia, bless her 13-year-old heart, tried to break the tension. Dad, can you help me with my history project tomorrow? It's about World War II, and Mrs. Peterson said we need to interview someone who knows about military stuff. Dad's fork clattered against his plate. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. I don't know much about military history, sweetheart. Maybe you should ask your Uncle Frank. He watches all those History Channel documentaries. This was strange. Dad had always been the one we turned to for history help. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of wars, battles, and military strategies. When I was Sophia's age, he could recite dates and details about conflicts I'd never even heard of. Now he was claiming ignorance. But Dad, remember when you helped Michael with his project about Vietnam? You knew so much about. I said ask your Uncle Frank. Dad's voice was firm, final. Sophia's face fell, and she looked down at her plate, confused and hurt by his uncharacteristic harshness. Mom reached over and squeezed Sophia's hand. It's okay, honey. Dad's just tired from work. But I could see the worry lines deepening around Mom's eyes. She had noticed the changes too. The late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the way Dad would sometimes stop mid-sentence when we entered a room, as if he had been about to say something he shouldn't. The rest of dinner passed in uncomfortable silence. Dad barely touched his food, pushing it around his plate while staring at something none of us could see. When Mom asked if he wanted dessert, he declined and excused himself, saying he had some work to finish in his study. As I helped clear the table, I caught Mom standing at the kitchen window, watching Dad's silhouette through the frosted glass of his study door. Her hands were trembling slightly as she dried the same plate over and over again. Mom, are you okay? She startled, as if she had forgotten I was there. Of course, sweetheart. Just thinking about things. What kind of things? She set the plate down and turned to face me fully. For a moment, I thought she might tell me what was really going on. Her lips parted, and I could see the words forming, but then she shook her head. Nothing you need to worry about, Michael. You have enough on your plate with college applications and everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. From my room, I could hear muffled voices coming from downstairs, Mom and Dad talking in urgent whispers. Their words were indistinct, but the tone was unmistakable: worry, fear, and something that sounded like desperation. I crept to the top of the stairs, trying to catch fragments of their conversation. "Can't keep doing this. They're getting closer. What about the kids?" "No choice." The word sent a chill down my spine. What were they talking about? Who was getting closer? And why did Dad sound so scared? I had never heard my father sound scared before. Even when I broke my arm falling off my bike, or when Sophia had to be rushed to the hospital with appendicitis, Dad had been the rock we all leaned on. Calm, composed, in control. But now, listening to his voice crack through the darkness, I realized that maybe I didn't know my father as well as I thought I did. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of uniforms and sirens, of men in dark suits knocking on our door, of my father being led away in handcuffs while Mom and Sophia cried. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare, but the fear lingered. The next morning, Dad left for work earlier than usual. Much earlier. By the time I came down for breakfast, his coffee cup was already in the sink, and his newspaper was folded neatly on the counter, unread. Mom was making pancakes, but her movements were mechanical, distracted. She had dark circles under her eyes that told the story of a sleepless night. "Where's Dad?" I asked, though I already knew he was gone. "He had an early meeting. Some important client or something." Her voice was too casual, too practiced. She was lying, and we both knew it. Sophia bounded into the kitchen, backpack slung over her shoulder, completely oblivious to the tension that seemed to permeate every corner of our house. "Is Dad going to drive me to school today?" she asked, grabbing a piece of toast. "No, honey. I'll drop you off on my way to work. But he always drives me on Wednesdays. It's our tradition." Mom's hand paused as she flipped a pancake. "Well, today's different. Why is everything different lately?" Sophia's voice carried a plaintive note that made my chest tighten. "Dad barely talks to us anymore, and when he does, he seems angry or sad or, I don't know, scared." Out of the mouths of babes. Even 13-year-old Sophia could sense that something was fundamentally wrong with our family dynamic. "Your father is just going through a stressful time at work," Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. "These things happen. It'll pass." But I wasn't so sure. The changes in Dad's behavior had been gradual but consistent, building over months like a storm gathering strength. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just work stress. After Mom dropped Sophia at school, I decided to skip my first class and drive to Dad's office instead. I told myself I was just being a good son, checking on him, maybe inviting him to lunch. But the truth was, I needed to see him, needed to look into his eyes and convince myself that everything was really okay. Dad worked for Henderson Logistics, a mid-sized company that handled shipping and transportation for various businesses throughout the city. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, steady, and it had provided for our family for over 15 years. Dad often said he liked the predictability of it, the way problems had clear solutions and everything could be tracked and organized. When I arrived at the office building, I noticed several black sedans parked in the visitor spaces. Something about them seemed off, too clean, too uniform, like government vehicles. I shook off the feeling and headed inside. The receptionist, Mrs. Chen, looked up when I entered. Her usual warm smile seemed strained, and I noticed her eyes dart nervously toward the elevator bank. "Michael. What a nice surprise. Are you here to see your father?" "Yeah, is he in?" "He's in a meeting right now. A very important meeting. Maybe you could come back later." There was something in her tone, a warning perhaps, that made me hesitate. Mrs. Chen had known me since I was a kid. She usually waved me right through without question. "What kind of meeting?" "I'm not really sure. Some men from, well, they didn't say exactly where they were from. But they seemed very official." My stomach dropped. Official men in an unofficial meeting with my father, who claimed to work in logistics but seemed to know more about military history than he let on. "I'll wait," I said, settling into one of the lobby chairs. Mrs. Chen looked uncomfortable. "Michael, I really think you should." The elevator dinged, and the doors opened. 3 men in dark suits stepped out, followed by my father and a man I recognized as Mr. Morrison, Dad's boss. The suited men looked exactly like what I imagined federal agents would look like, clean-cut, serious, with the kind of alertness that suggested they were always ready for trouble. Dad saw me immediately. For just a moment, his composure cracked, and I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before, genuine fear. Not for himself, but for me. He quickly recovered, but the damage was done. "Michael," he said, walking over with forced casualness. "What are you doing here?" I thought maybe we could grab lunch. I'm afraid that won't be possible today, son. I have a lot of work to catch up on. One of the suited men glanced at me with professional interest. This your boy, Ed? Dad's jaw tightened at the informal use of his name. Yes. Michael, these gentlemen are consultants. They're helping us with some complex shipping regulations. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Smart-looking kid. What are you studying in college? Pre-law, I answered automatically, though my mind was racing. Why would shipping consultants look like federal agents? And why was Dad so nervous? Law, huh? That's a respectable field. Your father must be proud. He is, Dad said quickly. Michael, you should get going. Don't you have class? Before I could respond, Mr. Morrison approached. I had seen him at company Christmas parties over the years, but we had never spoken directly. He was a tall man with graying hair and an air of authority that seemed to extend beyond his role as a logistics manager. Michael, good to see you again, he said, extending his hand. Your father's told us so much about you. Thank you, sir. How are your studies going? Still planning on law school? Yes, sir. I'm hoping to get into Georgetown. Morrison nodded approvingly. Excellent choice. Your father's always been proud of your academic achievements. Haven't you, Colonel? The word hit me like a physical blow. Colonel. The lobby seemed to tilt, and for a moment, I thought I might be sick. Time stopped. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and impossible to ignore. Dad's face went completely white, and Morrison's expression shifted from casual friendliness to horror as he realized what he had just said. I meant. Morrison stammered, looking desperately at Dad, then at the federal agents, then back at me. Your father is so respected here, we sometimes joke that he runs the place like a military operation, but it was too late. The word was out, Colonel. My father, the man who got up every morning at 6 to go to a logistics office, who complained about taxes and watched football on Sundays, who had never mentioned any military service, was a colonel. The federal agents were watching the exchange with keen interest. One of them stepped forward. I think we're done here for today, he said to Dad. We'll be in touch about those shipping regulations. Dad nodded stiffly. Of course. Thank you for your time. As the agents left, Morrison grabbed Dad's arm. Ed, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It's fine, Dad said, though his voice suggested it was anything but fine. We'll talk later. Morrison hurried away, leaving Dad and me alone in the lobby. Mrs. Chen had conveniently found paperwork that required her immediate attention, leaving us with the illusion of privacy. Dad, I said quietly, we need to talk. Not here, he replied, glancing around the lobby. Not now, then when? Tonight? Tomorrow? When are you going to explain why your boss just called you Colonel? Dad's shoulders sagged, and for a moment, he looked older than his 52 years. Michael, please. This isn't the time or place. Then what is the time and place? Because I'm pretty sure I deserve an explanation. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his options. Finally, he sighed. Tonight. After dinner. But Michael, I need you to promise me something. What? Don't mention this to your mother or Sophia. Not yet. Please. The plea in his voice was heartbreaking. This was my father, the strongest man I knew, begging me to keep a secret that I didn't even understand yet. Okay, I said. But tonight, I want the truth. All of it. He nodded, though I could see the reluctance in his eyes. Tonight, I left the office feeling like I was walking through a dream. Every memory from the past few months took on new significance. The late-night phone calls, the mysterious meetings, the way Dad sometimes went completely still when military news came on television. How had I missed it? How had we all missed it? If you're finding this story as gripping as I am, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more intense family dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Share this with someone who loves a good psychological thriller. Trust me, you'll want to discuss this ending. Now, back to our story. The drive home was a blur. I kept replaying Morrison's slip-up, analyzing every word, every facial expression. Colonel. The title carried weight, authority, and most importantly, a past that my father had never shared with his family. When I got home, Mom was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She looked up when I entered, and I could see the question in her eyes. How was your day, honey? Fine, I lied, just as Dad had lied to us the night before. Just the usual, but nothing was usual anymore. As I sat at the kitchen table, watching Mom chop vegetables with practiced efficiency, I wondered how much she knew. Did she know about Dad's military past? Was she part of the deception, or was she as much in the dark as Sophia and I had been? Sophia came home from school full of teenage drama about her friends and teachers, blissfully unaware that our family was sitting on top of what felt like a ticking time bomb. I envied her innocence, her ability to worry about algebra tests and cafeteria food instead of federal agents and family secrets. When Dad came home at his usual time, he greeted us with forced cheerfulness. But I could see the strain around his eyes, the way his smile didn't quite reach them. At dinner, he made an effort to engage in normal conversation, asking about our days, commenting on the weather, discussing weekend plans. But underneath the veneer of normalcy, I could feel the tension crackling like electricity. Every time the phone rang, Dad's hand would pause halfway to his mouth. Every time a car drove by outside, his eyes would flick toward the window. He was scared, though he was trying hard not to show it. After dinner, as Mom and Sophia settled in to watch a movie in the living room, Dad caught my eye and nodded toward his study. My heart began to race. This was it. This was when I would finally learn the truth about who my father really was. The study was Dad's sanctuary, lined with bookshelves and filled with the comfortable smell of old leather and coffee. He closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit in the chair across from his desk. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. I could see him struggling with where to begin, how to explain a lifetime of secrets in a single conversation. The man you've known as your father, he said finally, is real. Everything I've been to you and your sister and your mother, that's all real. But it's not complete. What does that mean? Dad walked to the window and parted the curtains slightly, scanning the street outside before turning back to me. Before you were born, before I met your mother, I was someone else. Colonel Edward Herrera, United States Army, Military Intelligence. I served for 12 years, specializing in counterterrorism and covert operations. The words hit me like a series of physical blows. Military intelligence. Covert operations. This was my father, the man who coached my little league team and taught me how to change a tire. What kind of covert operations? The kind that don't officially exist. The kind that are necessary to keep people like you and Sophia and your mother safe, but that no one wants to think about too hard. His voice was steady, but I could see his hands shaking slightly. I worked primarily in South America and the Middle East, tracking terrorist cells, gathering intelligence, and sometimes. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes taking direct action when diplomatic solutions weren't possible. You mean you killed people? The words hung in the air between us. Dad's face went very still. I served my country, Michael. I followed orders. I did what was necessary to protect American interests and American lives. It wasn't a denial, which somehow made it worse. My father, the man who wouldn't let me watch R-rated movies until I was 16, had killed people. Multiple people, from the sound of it. Why did you leave? Because I met your mother. His voice softened. Because I fell in love and realized that I wanted a different life. A normal life. A life where I could come home every night to a family that loved me, where I could coach Little League and help with homework and argue about curfews. A life where I could be just Ed Herrera, not Colonel Herrera. So you just quit? It's not that simple. When you're involved in the kind of work I did, you don't just walk away. There are protocols, debriefings, security clearances to maintain. But eventually, yes, I was able to transition to civilian life. I got the job at Henderson Logistics, we bought this house, and I thought I could leave the past behind. But you couldn't. Dad's laugh was bitter. No, I couldn't. Because the past has a way of catching up with you, especially when you've been involved in operations that are now under investigation. My blood ran cold. What kind of investigation? There are congressional committees looking into some of the programs I was involved with. Operations that may have exceeded their authorized parameters. And there are people who want to hold someone accountable for decisions that were made in the field under extreme circumstances. Are you in trouble? Dad was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I might be. The men you saw today at my office, they're from the Department of Defense. They're trying to determine exactly what I knew about certain operations and when I knew it. They're also trying to figure out if I'm willing to testify about what I saw and what I did. And are you? That's the question, isn't it? Dad looked up at me, and I saw a pain in his eyes that went deeper than anything I had ever witnessed. If I testify, I might be able to avoid prosecution. But I'll also have to reveal details about operations that could compromise national security and put other people at risk. And if I don't testify, you could go to prison. It's possible. The room felt like it was spinning. In the space of a few hours, my entire understanding of my family, my father, and my life had been turned upside down. The man I had looked up to my entire life was not just a father and a husband and a logistics manager. He was also a trained killer with a past that might land him in federal prison. Does Mom know? Some of it. She knows I was in the military, but not about the specific nature of my work. She knows something is happening now, but not the full extent of it. What about Sophia? Sophia knows nothing, and I want to keep it that way for as long as possible. I understood. Sophia was still young enough to believe that the world was basically a good place, that parents were heroes, and that families stayed together. Why shatter that innocence before it was absolutely necessary? What happens now? I don't know. Dad's voice was heavy with exhaustion. I'm trying to negotiate with the investigators, trying to find a way to cooperate without destroying other people's lives or compromising ongoing operations. But it's complicated, and there are no guarantees. What can I do? Dad looked at me with surprise, as if he hadn't expected me to offer help. You can keep being the son I'm proud of. You can continue your studies, take care of your mother and sister if something happens to me, and try to remember that whatever you learn about my past, I've tried to be the best father I could be. Tears were burning my eyes. You are the best father. You've always been my hero. I don't deserve to be anyone's hero, Michael. Heroes don't carry the kind of baggage I carry. Yes, they do. I stood up and walked around the desk to where he was sitting. Heroes are people who do difficult things when they have to, and who try to protect the people they love. You've protected us our whole lives. You've been there for every birthday, every school play, every scraped knee. You taught me how to throw a curveball and how to tie a tie and how to treat people with respect. That's what makes you a hero, Dad. Not whatever you did before I was born. Dad pulled me into a hug, and I could feel his shoulders shaking. For the first time in my life, I was the one comforting him instead of the other way around. I'm scared, Michael, he whispered. I'm scared of what's going to happen to our family. We'll figure it out, I said, though I had no idea how. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. As we held each other in the quiet of his study, with the rest of the family watching television in the next room, completely unaware that our lives were about to change forever, I realized that this was what growing up really meant. It wasn't about turning 18 or going to college or getting a job. It was about discovering that the people you love are more complicated than you ever imagined, and choosing to love them anyway. But even as I made that choice, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The word "Colonel" had opened a door that could never be closed again, and whatever lay on the other side was going to test our family in ways we had never been tested before. The investigation was ongoing. The men in dark suits would be back. And somewhere out there, people were making decisions that would determine whether my father came home for dinner tomorrow night, or whether he would be led away in handcuffs while Mom and Sophia watched their world crumble. As we finally broke apart and Dad wiped his eyes, I realized that the comfortable routine of our Tuesday night dinners might be a thing of the past. From now on, every meal together would be precious, because we never knew which one might be our last. The silence at our dinner table had been broken, but what came next might be even harder to bear. As we stood there in Dad's study, the weight of his revelations settling between us like a heavy fog, I heard something that made my blood freeze, the sound of car doors slamming outside our house. Not just one car, multiple cars. Dad's head snapped toward the window, his military training instantly kicking in. In one fluid motion, he moved to the edge of the curtain and peered out, his body tense and alert in a way I had never seen before. Shit, he whispered, and I had never heard my father curse like that in front of me. What is it? They're here. 3 black SUVs. Federal agents. His voice was calm, but I could see the panic in his eyes. Michael, listen to me very carefully. I need you to go to your mother and Sophia right now. Tell them to stay in the living room, no matter what happens. Do not let them come to the front door. Dad, what's happening? They're not here to talk anymore. He moved away from the window and opened his desk drawer, pulling out a cell phone I had never seen before. They're here to arrest me. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by heavy knocking. Even from the study, I could hear the authority in those knocks. This wasn't a social call. Mr. Herrera, this is Agent Davidson with the FBI. We need to speak with you. Dad closed his eyes for a moment, then looked at me with an expression that broke my heart. Go to your family, son. Take care of them. I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are. Because if you don't, they're going to see their father arrested, and that's something they'll never be able to forget. From the living room, I could hear Mom's voice, confused and frightened. Michael. Ed? What's going on? The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Mr. Herrera, we have a warrant. Please open the door. Dad straightened his shoulders, and for a moment, I could see the colonel he used to be, the commanding officer who had led men into dangerous situations and made impossible decisions. Michael, I need you to promise me something else. What? Whatever happens, whatever you hear about me in the news or read in the papers, remember that everything I did was because I believed it was right at the time. I'm not asking you to agree with my choices, but I need you to know that I never set out to hurt innocent people. Tears were streaming down my face now. Dad, promise me. I promise. He nodded and headed toward the study door. I followed him into the hallway, where we could see Mom and Sophia standing in the living room doorway, their faces pale with confusion and growing fear. Ed, what's happening? Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Dad could answer, the front door burst open. Federal agents flooded into our house like a tactical team, their weapons drawn but pointed down, their movements precise and coordinated. They wore bulletproof vests with FBI emblazoned across the front, and their faces were grim and professional. Sophia screamed and grabbed onto Mom, who pulled her close while staring at the armed men now occupying our living room. Edward Herrera, the lead agent announced, you are under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and violations of the Geneva Convention in connection with Operation Silent Thunder. Operation Silent Thunder. Even the name sounded ominous, like something out of a spy novel rather than my father's real life. I understand, Dad said quietly, holding his hands out in front of him. As the agent moved to handcuff him, Dad looked back at us one more time. I love you, he said to Mom, his voice breaking. All of you. Never forget that. Dad, no. Sophia broke away from Mom and ran toward him, but one of the agents gently but firmly intercepted her. It's okay, sweetheart, the agent said softly. Your father isn't going to be hurt. We just need to talk to him. But Sophia was crying hysterically now, and Mom had sunk to her knees, one hand covering her mouth in shock. The sight of my family falling apart before my eyes was almost more than I could bear. As they led Dad toward the door, he caught my eye one last time. The look he gave me was a mixture of love, regret, and something else, a silent plea for me to be strong, to hold our family together, to become the man he had raised me to be. Take care of them, he mouthed silently. And then he was gone, led away in handcuffs while neighbors gathered on their porches to watch the spectacle. The man who had been my hero, my role model, my father, was now a federal prisoner. The lead agent, Davidson, stayed behind for a few minutes to explain what would happen next. There would be a hearing, bail might be possible, we could visit him under certain circumstances. But his words washed over me like white noise. All I could focus on was the empty space where my father had been standing just moments before. After the agents left, our house felt hollow, violated. The three of us sat in the living room, shell-shocked and silent. Sophia was still crying quietly, and Mom was staring at the wall with a blank expression that scared me more than tears would have. Mom, I said gently, we need to call a lawyer. She looked at me as if she was seeing me for the first time. A lawyer? Yes. We need to help your father. What's Operation Silent Thunder? Sophia asked through her tears. Mom and I exchanged glances. How do you explain to a 13-year-old that her father might be a war criminal? How do you tell her that the man who read her bedtime stories and taught her to ride a bike might have been involved in things that violate international law? We don't know yet, sweetheart, Mom said finally. But we're going to find out, and we're going to help Dad through this. Over the next few hours, our house became a battlefield of ringing phones and pounding on the front door. News crews arrived first, followed by reporters shoving microphones at our windows and shouting questions about Colonel Herrera and his involvement in classified military operations. The phone rang constantly, neighbors wanting to know what was happening, relatives who had seen the news, and reporters trying to get quotes from the family. Mom finally took the phone off the hook, but that just made the knocking at the door more persistent. Through it all, I kept thinking about the conversation Dad and I had shared in his study just hours earlier. He had been trying to prepare me for this moment, trying to give me the tools I would need to protect Mom and Sophia when he couldn't do it himself. As the evening wore on and the reporters finally began to disperse, we huddled together on the couch, exhausted and overwhelmed. Sophia had fallen asleep with her head on Mom's lap, and Mom was stroking her hair with shaking hands. Michael, Mom said quietly, did your father tell you anything else? Anything that might help us understand what's happening? I looked down at Sophia's sleeping face, so young and innocent, and made a decision. There would be time later to tell Mom everything I knew. For now, she had enough to deal with. He said he loved us, I replied. And that whatever happened, we needed to stick together. Mom nodded, tears finally beginning to flow down her cheeks. 18 years, she whispered. 18 years of marriage, and I feel like I didn't really know him at all. You knew him, I said firmly. You knew the man who loved you enough to give up his old life. You knew the father who never missed a soccer game or a school play. You knew the husband who brought you coffee in bed every Sunday morning. That man is real, Mom. That man is Dad. She squeezed my hand. When did you get so wise? About 3 hours ago, I said, and despite everything, she smiled. As we sat there in the wreckage of our normal life, I realized that this was our new reality. The man we loved was gone, replaced by a defendant in a federal case that would probably dominate the news for months. Our family name would be associated with scandal and controversy. Sophia would have to face her classmates' questions and whispered conversations. Mom would have to decide whether to stand by a husband whose past she was only beginning to understand. And I would have to keep the promise I had made to Dad, to take care of them, to be strong when they couldn't be, to hold our family together even as forces beyond our control tried to tear us apart. The phone started ringing again, and I got up to answer it, thinking it might be news about Dad's arraignment. Instead, I heard a voice I didn't recognize, cold and threatening. Tell your father that some secrets should stay buried. Tell him that cooperation might not be enough to keep his family safe. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone with my heart pounding. Someone was threatening us. Someone who didn't want Dad to testify, who saw our family as collateral damage in whatever larger game was being played. I quietly hung up the phone without telling Mom about the call. She had enough to worry about without knowing that we might be in actual danger. But as I looked out the front window at the empty street, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The word "Colonel" had started this avalanche, but I was beginning to realize that Dad's arrest was just the beginning. Whatever Operation Silent Thunder was, whatever my father had done in the name of national security, it had created enemies who were still out there, still dangerous, and now very much aware of where we lived. As I helped Mom carry Sophia upstairs to bed, I made a silent vow. Whatever it took, however long this nightmare lasted, I would protect my family. Dad had spent years protecting strangers in foreign countries. Now it was my turn to protect the people I loved most. The first chapter of our ordeal was over, but I had a feeling that the worst was yet to come. And somewhere in a federal holding cell, my father, the hero, the colonel, the man with secrets that might destroy us all, was probably making his own plans for the battles ahead. The silence at our dinner table had been shattered forever, replaced by the chaos of a family under siege. But we were still here, still together, and as long as that remained true, there was hope. Even if that hope felt as fragile as glass in a hurricane. Reintenterclaude puede cometer errors. Por favor, verifique las respuestas.